In a quiet little town called Willow Creek, life moved at its own slow pace. The streets were lined with old oak trees, and the air always carried the faint smell of freshly cut grass. It wasn't the kind of place where much changed, until one summer when a new family moved into the neighborhood. Among them was a 16-year-old girl who would soon become the talk of the town. Amara had grown up in Chicago, a city that never slept, where skyscrapers pierced the clouds and people from all walks of life filled the streets. Life there was loud, colorful, and fast-paced. But her father's job transfer meant leaving everything familiar behind. Now here she was, stepping into a world so different it might as well have been another planet. On her first day at Willow Creek High School, Amara felt like an outsider, and not just because she was new. Her dark skin stood out in a sea of pale faces, and her braided hair caught curious glances as she walked down the hallway. She could feel eyes on her, some curious, others judgmental. Whispers followed her every move. Who is she? Why does she dress like that? She looks different. Amara didn't let it bother her too much. She'd learned early on that being different wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was something to embrace. Still, she couldn't help but notice how unwelcoming some of her classmates seemed. One group in particular made no effort to hide their disdain. There were 4 of them, 3 boys and a girl, all popular and used to getting their way. They ruled the school with smug grins and sharp tongues, making sure everyone knew exactly who was in charge. The leader of the pack was a tall guy with broad shoulders and a cocky attitude. He strutted around like he owned the place, flanked by his friends. 2 of them were lanky guys who laughed at everything he said, while the 4th member, a girl with bleached blonde hair, looked like she spent more time staring at herself in the mirror than paying attention to anything else. Together, they formed a tight-knit crew that thrived on intimidation. During lunchtime, Amara found herself sitting alone at a corner table. She opened her bag, pulling out the sandwich her mom had packed for her. Just as she took her first bite, she noticed the group heading straight toward her. Her stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. She wasn't going to let anyone see her sweat. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence, the leader sneered, stopping right in front of her table. His voice dripped with sarcasm, loud enough to draw stares from nearby students. Big city girl thinks she can just waltz in here and act like she owns the place? Amara looked up slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. She didn't say a word, letting the silence stretch between them. Finally, she replied, "I'm not trying to own anything, I'm just here to learn." Her tone was steady, almost casual, as if she hadn't noticed the mocking edge in his voice. This response only seemed to irritate him further. "Learn? Oh, we'll teach you plenty, don't worry about that," he shot back, leaning closer. His friends snickered behind him, clearly enjoying the show. "You've got a lot to figure out if you want to fit in around here." Amara tilted her head slightly, studying him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Fit in where? With people who spend their time picking on others?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. For a moment the boy faltered, caught off guard by her directness, but then his smirk returned, wider this time. "You're brave, I'll give you that," he said, taking a step back. "But bravery won't save you from what's coming next. See you around, big city girl." As they walked away, laughing among themselves, Amara exhaled deeply. She hadn't expected her first day to go smoothly, but she also hadn't anticipated such hostility. Still, she reminded herself of something her uncle used to tell her. When someone tries to push you down, they're usually scared of what you can do. She didn't know these kids yet, but she already sensed that their bravado masked something deeper: fear, insecurity, or maybe both. Over the next few days, things didn't improve. The whispers continued, and small acts of cruelty started piling up. Someone tripped her in the hallway, causing her books to scatter across the floor. Another time, she arrived at her locker to find crude drawings scrawled across it in permanent marker. Each incident chipped away at her patience, though she refused to let it break her spirit. What bothered her most wasn't the pranks themselves. It was the lack of intervention. Teachers turned a blind eye, dismissing the behavior as harmless. Teenage antics. Other students either joined in or stayed silent, afraid to stand up to the bullies. Amara realized she was on her own, and that realization stung. But deep down, she knew she had resources they didn't expect. Growing up in Chicago, Amara had spent countless hours training in martial arts under her uncle, a former fighter who believed in discipline and self-respect. She'd earned multiple black belts and competed in tournaments, proving time and again that size and strength weren't the only factors in a fight. Though she hoped she'd never need to use those skills, she carried them with her like a hidden weapon, ready if necessary. One afternoon after gym class, Amara found herself alone in the locker room. She was tying her shoelaces when she heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, she saw the same group blocking the doorway. Their leader stepped forward, his expression cold and calculating. "Time for your lesson," he said, cracking his knuckles. His friends spread out around him, forming a semicircle that trapped her against the lockers. Amara stood up slowly, her heart pounding but her mind clear. She locked eyes with him, daring him to make the first move. And then, with a single sentence, she flipped the script entirely. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with warning. As she shifted into a defensive stance, the bullies hesitated, unsure of what they were truly dealing with. Little did they know, their plan to intimidate her was about to backfire in ways they couldn't imagine. The tension in the locker room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Amara stood her ground, her posture relaxed yet alert, like a coiled spring ready to snap into action. The leader of the group, the tall, broad-shouldered boy who thought he ruled the school, glared at her, his confidence wavering for just a split second. His friends fanned out behind him, trying to look intimidating, but their body language betrayed them. They shifted uneasily, glancing at each other as if silently asking, "Are we really doing this?" "You think you're tough, huh?" The leader growled, stepping closer. "Talking big and acting like you don't care about anyone here. Let's see how tough you are when it's 4 against 1. Amara didn't flinch. Instead, she raised an eyebrow, almost amused by his bravado. 4 against 1, she repeated, her voice calm but laced with steel. That doesn't sound very fair. But hey, life isn't always fair, is it? Her words hung in the air, and for a moment no one moved. Then, without warning, the leader lunged at her, his fist swinging wildly. It was exactly what Amara had been waiting for. With fluid grace, she sidestepped his clumsy attack, grabbing his arm mid-swing and using his momentum to flip him onto the floor. He landed with a thud, gasping in shock as pain shot through his back. "What the?" One of the other boys started, but before he could finish, Amara spun around, delivering a swift kick to his knee. He crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg and groaning in pain. The blonde girl shrieked, taking a step back, while the third boy froze, unsure whether to run or fight. "Who's next?" Amara asked, her voice steady but sharp enough to slice through the chaos. She locked eyes with the remaining boy, daring him to make a move. He hesitated, panic flickering across his face, then bolted toward the door, leaving his friends behind. The blonde girl tried to follow, but Amara reached out, gently catching her wrist. Not to hurt her, but to stop her from running. "Wait," Amara said, her tone softening slightly. "Do you really want to keep doing this? Is this who you want to be?" The girl stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, yanking her hand free and stumbling after the others. In less than a minute, the entire group had scattered, leaving Amara alone in the locker room. She took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline fade. Her heart was still racing, but she felt strangely calm. This wasn't how she'd wanted things to play out. She hadn't come to Willow Creek looking for trouble. She'd simply wanted to survive high school like everyone else. But these kids had pushed her to a point where she couldn't stay silent anymore. And now they were learning a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Word spread faster than wildfire. By the end of the day, nearly every student at Willow Creek High knew what had happened in the locker room. Some versions of the story were exaggerated. People claimed Amara had thrown punches left and right, or that she'd somehow managed to take down an entire gang single-handedly. But the core truth remained. The new girl had stood up to the biggest bullies in school, and she'd won. At first, reactions were mixed. A few students cheered her on, whispering excitedly about how brave she was. Others looked at her with wide eyes, unsure whether to admire her or fear her. And then there were those who resented her, accusing her of starting trouble and ruining the status quo. Even some teachers seemed uneasy, unsure how to handle the situation. When Amara walked into homeroom the next morning, the classroom fell silent. Every eye was on her, and for a moment she felt like she was back in the locker room, surrounded by hostility. But instead of shrinking away, she held her head high and took her seat. If people wanted to stare, fine. Let them. She wasn't going to let their judgment define her. Later that afternoon, the principal called her into his office. Amara braced herself for the worst, assuming the bullies had complained about her actions. When she entered the room, she found not only the principal, but also the 4 students who had confronted her in the locker room. They sat slumped in their chairs, avoiding eye contact, their usual arrogance replaced by shame. "Amara," the principal began, gesturing for her to sit. "Can you tell me what happened yesterday?" She nodded, recounting the events as honestly as possible. She explained how the group had cornered her, how they'd threatened her, and how she'd defended herself when they attacked. She didn't raise her voice or try to paint herself as a victim. She simply told the truth, letting the facts speak for themselves. When she finished, the principal turned to the 4 students. "Is this accurate?" he asked, his tone firm but fair. One by one they mumbled their agreement, unable to meet his gaze. The leader, who had strutted around the school like he owned it just days earlier, now looked like a chastised child. After hearing both sides, the principal made his decision. The 4 students were suspended for their behavior, which included harassment and physical aggression. Amara, meanwhile, faced no consequences. The principal acknowledged that she had acted in self-defense and commended her for handling the situation with restraint. As she left the office, Amara felt a mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and even a little sadness. She hadn't wanted any of this to happen. All she'd ever wanted was to fit in, to find her place in a world that often felt unwelcoming. But sometimes, fitting in meant standing out, and standing up for yourself. Over the next few weeks, life at Willow Creek High began to change. Students who had once ignored Amara, or worse, mocked her, started approaching her with questions. "How did you learn to fight like that? Were you scared? Why didn't you tell anyone what was happening?" At first, she was hesitant to open up, unsure of who she could trust. But gradually, she realized that sharing her story might help others. So during lunch breaks, she started talking to smaller groups of students. She told them about growing up in Chicago, about training under her uncle and competing in tournaments. She explained that martial arts weren't just about fighting. They were about discipline, respect, and knowing when to walk away. Most importantly, she emphasized that strength wasn't about overpowering others. It was about protecting yourself and standing up for what's right. Her words resonated with many of her classmates. Some admitted they'd been bullied too, either by the same group or by others. Others confessed they'd stayed silent because they were afraid of becoming targets themselves. Amara listened patiently, offering advice when asked but never pushing anyone to do something they weren't ready for. Slowly but surely, she began to earn their trust. Even the bullies, who returned to school after their suspensions, acted differently. They kept to themselves, avoiding eye contact with Amara whenever they passed her in the halls. Gone was their swagger, replaced by a quiet humility. One day, the leader approached her after class, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I wanted to say sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "We messed up. You were right. We shouldn't have done what we did." Amara studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity in his expression. Finally, she nodded. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "But remember, actions matter more than words. Show me you've changed, and maybe we can start fresh." Nodded quickly, relief washing over his face, and hurried away. Watching him go, Amara felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, Just maybe this town wasn't as closed off as it seemed. Maybe, with time and effort, it could become a place where everyone belonged, not just the ones who fit the mold. After the incident in the locker room, Amara's life at Willow Creek High became a whirlwind of attention. Some students admired her for standing up to the bullies, while others kept their distance, unsure of how to handle someone who didn't fit into their usual categories. She wasn't just the new girl anymore, she was the girl who took down the bullies. It was a label she hadn't asked for, but one she couldn't escape. At first, Amara tried to brush it off. She went about her days as usual, attending classes, doing homework, and keeping to herself during lunch. But the whispers followed her everywhere. In the hallways, people would stop talking when she passed by, only to start again once she was out of earshot. In gym class, teammates hesitated to pass her the ball, afraid they might accidentally provoke her. Even teachers seemed to treat her differently, calling on her more often in class or giving her extra praise for answers that would have earned anyone else a simple nod. It was exhausting. Amara didn't want to be put on a pedestal, or worse, feared. All she wanted was to belong, to find a place where she could just be herself without constantly having to prove something. But the harder she tried to blend in, the more she stood out. One day, during a particularly quiet lunch period, a shy freshman approached her. The girl looked nervous, fidgeting with the strap of her backpack as she hovered near Amara's table. Hi, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Can I sit here? Amara smiled warmly, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. Of course, pull up a chair. The girl introduced herself and explained why she'd come over. I heard what you did in the locker room, she said, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear. That was really brave. I've been dealing with some stuff too, and I don't know how to handle it. Do you think maybe we could talk sometime? Amara nodded, touched by the girl's vulnerability. Sure, she said. Anytime you need to talk, I'm here. That conversation marked the beginning of a shift, not just for Amara, but for the entire school. Word got around that she wasn't just tough, she was also kind and willing to listen. More students began approaching her, sharing stories of their own struggles. Some had been bullied, like her. Others felt isolated because of their interests, appearance, or background. A few admitted they were scared to speak up, worried about retaliation or being labeled as troublemakers. Listening to them, Amara realized something important. She wasn't alone. There were cracks in Willow Creek's surface, hidden beneath its picture-perfect exterior. Beneath the football games, cheerleading routines, and homecoming dances lay a community fractured by fear, prejudice, and silence. And if no one else was going to address these issues, maybe it was time for her to step up. With the help of a small group of students who shared her vision, Amara decided to take action. They started meeting after school in the library, brainstorming ways to make the school a safer and more inclusive place. At first, their ideas were modest: a bulletin board where students could post anonymous compliments, or a weekly kindness challenge, encouraging random acts of goodwill. But as their discussions grew deeper, so did their plans. One idea quickly gained traction: self-defense workshops. Amara had already mentioned her martial arts training to a few classmates, and many were eager to learn more. If you can teach us even a little bit, one student said, it might give us the confidence to stand up for ourselves or for someone else if we ever need to. Amara agreed, though she made it clear that the workshops weren't about fighting. It's not about hurting people, she emphasized. It's about knowing your worth and being prepared to protect yourself if necessary. But the best defense is always avoiding conflict in the first place. The first workshop drew a surprising number of attendees. Students of all ages and backgrounds showed up, curious and eager to learn. Amara led them through basic techniques: how to block a punch, how to break free from a grab, how to use body language to project confidence. She also taught them de-escalation strategies, showing them how to defuse tense situations with words instead of fists. What surprised her most was how much the workshops meant to the participants. After each session, students lingered to thank her, sharing stories of how the skills had already helped them feel safer. One boy confessed that he'd used a verbal de-escalation technique to calm down a heated argument between his friends. A girl said she finally felt comfortable walking home alone after learning how to defend herself. Encouraged by the positive response, Amara expanded the workshops to include discussions about bullying, mental health, and inclusion. She invited guest speakers from local organizations to talk about topics like empathy, resilience, and the importance of standing up for others. Slowly but surely, the culture at Willow Creek High began to shift. Meanwhile, the former bullies who had returned to school after their suspensions were struggling to adjust to their new reality. Without their ringleader's bravado to hold them together, the group unraveled. The leader spent most of his time sulking, avoiding eye contact with anyone who dared look his way. His friends drifted apart, each trying to distance themselves from the drama that had once defined them. One afternoon, as Amara was packing up her things after a self-defense workshop, she noticed the leader lingering near the door. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, as if debating whether to approach her. Finally, he mustered the courage to step forward. "Hey," he said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "Can we, talk for a minute?" Amara raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Sure. What's up?" He hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I just wanted to say thanks," he mumbled, his cheeks flushing red, "for not making things worse for me and my friends. We deserved it, but you didn't have to go easy on us." Amara studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity in his expression. When she found it, she gave him a small smile. "You're welcome," she said simply. "But remember, apologizing is just the first step. If you really want to change, show people through your actions, not just your words." He nodded earnestly, looking both relieved and determined. Over the next few weeks, he began making amends, quietly reaching out to those he'd hurt and offering genuine apologies. It wasn't easy, and not everyone forgave him right away. But the effort spoke volumes. As the semester wore on, the changes at Willow Creek High became undeniable. Students who had once kept to themselves started forming friendships across cliques. Teachers reported fewer incidents of bullying and more instances of collaboration in class. Even the atmosphere in the cafeteria felt lighter, with laughter, replacing the tense silence that had once dominated the space. Amara knew there was still work to be done. Old habits died hard and progress wouldn't happen overnight, but for the first time since moving to Willow Creek, she felt hopeful. She had come to this town as an outsider, expecting nothing but challenges. Instead, she had found purpose, and, in doing so, she had inspired others to do the same. By the time winter rolled around, Amara had become more than just a student. She was a leader, a role model, and a catalyst for change. And though she never sought the spotlight, she embraced the responsibility that came with it, knowing that every small act of kindness or courage could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she might never fully understand. Winter settled over Willow Creek, bringing with it frosty mornings and the faint smell of wood smoke in the air. The holidays were just around the corner, and the school buzzed with excitement. Decorations went up in the hallways, strings of twinkling lights, paper snowflakes taped to lockers, and a giant Christmas tree standing tall in the main lobby. But amidst all the cheer, Amara noticed something deeper brewing beneath the surface. The changes she and her group had worked so hard to spark were starting to take root. Students who had once kept their heads down during class now raised their hands more often. Cliques that had been rigid and exclusive began to blur at the edges, as people from different circles started sitting together at lunch or teaming up for group projects. Even the teachers seemed more engaged, encouraging open discussions about respect, empathy, and community. But not everyone was thrilled about the shift. Some students clung stubbornly to the old ways, resentful of the new atmosphere. They grumbled under their breath about PC nonsense or muttered that things were better when everyone stayed in their lane. Amara heard the whispers, saw the rolled eyes, but she didn't let it bother her too much. Change was uncomfortable, it always was, and resistance came with the territory. One afternoon, as she walked through the crowded halls after school, A senior boy stepped into her path. He wasn't part of the original group of bullies, but he shared their cocky demeanor. Leaning against the lockers, he crossed his arms and smirked. "So, you're the big hero now, huh?" he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Saving the world one self-defense class at a time?" Amara stopped, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm not trying to be a hero," she replied evenly. "Just helping people feel safer. Why does that bother you?" He shrugged, feigning nonchalance, but there was an edge to his voice. "Because you're making waves. People are getting ideas, thinking they can stand up to anyone. You think that's going to end well?" Amara tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But isn't it better than staying silent and letting bad behavior slide? If standing up means rocking the boat, then yeah, I'll rock it." For a moment, the boy looked like he wanted to argue further, but instead, he shook his head and walked away, muttering something under his breath. Amara watched him go, feeling a mix of frustration and understanding. Not everyone would agree with her methods, or even understand them, but she couldn't let that stop her. Progress wasn't about pleasing everyone. It was about doing what was right, even when it was hard. As the weeks passed, Amara threw herself into organizing events that brought the school closer together. One of her biggest initiatives was a talent show fundraiser designed to raise money for a local youth center. The idea came from a brainstorming session with her group, where someone suggested showcasing the diverse skills within the student body. At first, Amara worried it might flop. Who would want to perform in front of the whole school? But to her surprise, dozens of students signed up. There were singers, dancers, poets, comedians, and even a few magicians. Some acts were polished while others were hilariously awkward. But every performance was met with enthusiastic applause. When the night of the talent show arrived, the auditorium was packed, with parents, teachers, and students filling every seat. The energy in the room was electric, a mix of nerves and excitement. Amara herself decided to participate, though not in the way most expected. Instead of performing martial arts moves or singing a song, she delivered a short speech before the final act. Standing on stage under the bright lights, she took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. "A lot of us have spent years pretending we don't see the cracks in our community," she began, her voice steady but warm. "We ignore the bullying, the cliques, the judgmental stares because it's easier than confronting them. But ignoring problems doesn't make them go away. It only makes them worse." She paused, scanning the audience. Faces young and old stared back at her, hanging on her every word. "Tonight we've seen something amazing," she continued. "We've seen people step out of their comfort zones, share their talents, and support each other. That's what this school is capable of, supporting one another, celebrating our differences, and building something stronger together." By the time she finished speaking, the room erupted into cheers. People stood and clapped, some wiping tears from their eyes. It wasn't just her words that moved them. It was the realization that they were part of something bigger, a collective effort to create a kinder, more inclusive environment. The success of the talent show gave Amara and her group momentum. They began planning more activities, a cultural fair celebrating different traditions, a mentorship program pairing upperclassmen with freshmen, and even a mural project to decorate the school walls with messages of unity and hope. Each event drew more participation, proving that the desire for connection ran deep. Even the skeptics started coming around. The boy who had confronted Amara in the hallway became a regular at the self-defense workshops, though he never admitted why. A group of athletes volunteered to help paint the mural, trading jerseys for paint-splattered t-shirts. And the former bullies, still working to rebuild their reputations, joined forces with Amara's group to organize a food drive for families in need. Through it all, Amara remained grounded. She knew the journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. There would still be setbacks, moments when old habits resurfaced or new conflicts arose. But she also knew that real change took time, patience, and persistence. Every small victory mattered, no matter how insignificant it might seem. By spring, Willow Creek High felt almost unrecognizable. The tension that had once filled the air had softened, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Conversations flowed more freely, laughter echoed louder, and smiles came easier. Amara found herself smiling too, often catching glimpses of the ripple effect her actions had created. One day, as she sat outside during lunch, a freshman girl approached her. "Hey, remember me?" the girl asked shyly. Amara nodded, recognizing her as the same student who had first reached out months ago. "I just wanted to say thank you," the girl continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "You changed everything. For me, for everyone. I used to hate coming to school, but now, I actually look forward to it." Amara felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't realized how much her efforts meant to others until that moment. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "None of this would have happened without people like you stepping up and believing in the possibility of change." The girl grinned, her shyness melting away. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. Thanks for showing us what's possible." As the girl walked away, Amara leaned back against the bench, soaking in the warmth of the sun. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, she felt truly at home, not because the town had changed, but because she had helped shape it into a place where everyone could belong. And that, she realized, was worth every challenge along the way. By the time graduation season rolled around, Willow Creek High School felt like a completely different place. The once divided student body had started to come together in ways no one thought possible. Friendships blossomed across cliques, and the hallways buzzed with conversations that weren't laced with judgment or fear. Amara walked through those halls with a quiet pride, not because she'd single-handedly transformed the school, but because she'd helped plant seeds of change that others had nurtured alongside her. The weeks leading up to graduation were a whirlwind of activity. Yearbooks were signed, caps were decorated, and plans for the future filled late-night study sessions. For Amara, it was bittersweet. She had grown to love this town and its people, even if it hadn't always loved her, back right away. Leaving felt like saying goodbye to a piece of herself, but she also knew she was ready for whatever came next. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Amara sat on the bleachers overlooking the football field. It was empty now, save for a few stray leaves swirling in the breeze. She let her mind wander, reflecting on everything she'd been through since moving to Willow Creek. From the loneliness of her first days to the chaos of standing up to bullies, every moment had shaped her into who she was today. She wasn't alone for long. A shadow fell over her, and she looked up to see the boy who had once led the group of bullies standing awkwardly at the edge of the bleachers. He hesitated before sitting down a few rows away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice rough with uncertainty. "Mind if I join you?" Amara shook her head. "Go ahead." For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, comfortable yet heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say thanks again. For everything. I know I already did, but I mean it. You didn't have to give me another chance, but you did. And it made me realize, well, a lot of things." Amara turned to look at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Like what?" she asked gently. He shrugged, staring out at the empty field. "That being tough doesn't mean acting like you don't care about anyone else. That it's okay to admit when you're wrong. And that sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the right thing." He glanced at her, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "You showed me that, not just with your words, but with how you acted, how you treated us, even after everything we did." Amara smiled softly. "Change isn't easy," she said. "But it starts with wanting to be better, and you've done that, I've seen it." He nodded, looking relieved. "Still, I owe you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday if you ever need anything." His voice trailed off, but the meaning behind his words hung in the air. "Thanks," Amara replied simply. "But honestly, you don't owe me anything. Just keep doing what you're doing, helping make this place better. That's all the thanks I need." Graduation day arrived faster than anyone expected. The ceremony was held outdoors, under a cloudless blue sky. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the school lawn, filled with proud parents, siblings, and friends. Seniors lined up in their caps and gowns, laughing nervously as they waited for their names to be called. When it was Amara's turn to walk across the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. Not just polite clapping, but genuine cheers. Teachers stood and whistled, students hooted from the audience, and somewhere in the mix she heard her mom's unmistakable whoop of joy. As she accepted her diploma, she scanned the sea of faces, taking in the people who had become her second family. Some she'd known since day one, others she'd met along the way. All of them mattered. After the ceremony, everyone gathered on the lawn for photos and hugs. Amara found herself surrounded by classmates, many of whom she wouldn't have imagined talking to during her first week at Willow Creek. One by one, they thanked her, not just for standing up to the bullies, but for inspiring them to stand up for themselves and each other. "You changed this school," one girl said, tears shining in her eyes. "You gave us hope." "I didn't do it alone," Amara reminded her. "We all did it. Together." As the afternoon wore on, the celebration moved to the park downtown. Someone had set up a makeshift DJ booth, and soon the grassy area was alive with music, laughter, and dancing. Amara joined in, spinning and twirling until her cheeks hurt from smiling. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to fully let go, soaking in the joy of the moment. Later that night, as fireworks lit up the sky, Amara stood with a small group of close friends. They talked about their dreams for the future, college, plans, career goals, adventures waiting just beyond the horizon. When someone asked Amara what she hoped to achieve, she paused, thinking carefully before answering. "I want to keep making a difference," she said finally. "Not necessarily in big ways, but in the little moments that add up. Whether it's teaching someone to believe in themselves or helping a community heal, I want to leave places better than I found them." Her friends nodded, clearly moved by her words. "You already have," one of them said. "Willow Creek will never forget you." In the weeks that followed, Amara packed up her room, boxing up memories and mementos from her time in the small town. On her last night in Willow Creek, she took a long walk through the streets she'd come to know so well. The oak trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches silhouetted against the starlit sky. She stopped outside the high school, gazing up at the building where so much of her life had unfolded. It wasn't perfect, no place ever was, but it was home. And she had played a part in making it a kinder, stronger, more inclusive space. As she turned to leave, she whispered a quiet thank you to the town that had taught her resilience, courage, and the power of community. The next morning, as the moving truck pulled away from the curb, Amara rolled down the window and waved goodbye. Her heart ached a little, but it was a good kind of ache, the kind that comes from knowing you've left something meaningful behind. Out on the open road, heading toward whatever lay ahead, Amara smiled. She didn't know exactly where life would take her, but she knew one thing for sure. Wherever she went, she'd carry Willow Creek and all the lessons it had taught her in her heart forever.